Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 3 of Climbing Mount CMMC.
Welcome back, climbers, to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. I'm your co-host, Bobby Guerra, joined by Kaleigh Floyd. Today, we're going to be talking about 5 things that I feel very passionate about that should be changed. We're really going to be talking theory here about stuff that I think if we changed about the way the CMMC ecosystem functions, it could be a lot easier to implement, and I don't think we would lose a lot ultimately when you look at things from a holistic perspective. Obviously, this is just my opinion, but I want to see what you think about them.
I'm excited. And I hope that Katie Arrington is listening to this podcast. Because I know she listens to every one. She's a big fan of all.
I know you're a fan. And Katie, if you implement any of these, we'll send you a shirt that's less than $20. So therefore, you can actually keep it, right? Because of the, I think, regulations, it can't be over $20.
I think you're right. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I think I have the list in front of me here to list them off. I am excited to get your perspective on each one of these. So the first one that you sent to me was allow C3PAOs the ability to provide recommendations. So you want to give a little bit of a backstory of why they can't right now, and then what your perspective is on it?
Yeah, I think some C3POs will be like, in the back behind us going, woo, woo, woo. Yes, absolutely. We love this. Those C3POs that have gone through that, it is so painful for them when they're like, oh, if they just made this one change, or if they just did this, it would be met, right? But they can't make recommendations on how things need to be because of the way that the rule is written. So it doesn't mean that the client couldn't be more secure if they made the recommendations. They just, for whatever reason, seem to live in this fear that there would be this evil henchman approach of collusion, where if they're providing consulting at the same time they're doing the assessing, that it's not going to be as thorough or as good. And I think that's not really true. I think you could create some safe boundaries around in the audit process that they could make recommendations about how you could fix or remediate those during the audit, not pre, but during the audit process that you could go through there. There's some precedents set there by other standards that they do allow for those types of things to happen. So I just don't know why they don't allow the auditors to at least, you're not met, and here's the recommendations that we might have. Not that it's got to be a detailed explanation of how they do everything, but at least allow them to give some suggestions on how they could address the not mets that they've got versus, good luck, you got it not met. And that's just my opinion on that one.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify too, something that you said is like, they can't be the full consultant for these companies and then also be the C3PO. You're not saying
I'm not saying that.
You're saying during the assessment.
During the assessment. Have a section where they can just provide remediation recommendations. Just you could just say, write it out. And maybe you don't allow them to talk about it. They just write it in the field. That would still be tremendously helpful.
The recommendation is reach out to an ESP.
Right. Reach out to someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's like reach out to another company. No, I definitely get what you mean. I also do think you brought up an incredible point a while ago to me when you were taking the CCA course of how you felt like they were stepping or like tiptoeing through the course because C3PAOs were so nervous about accidentally providing recommendations during the class to somebody that might potentially, end up being somebody who's under them or whatnot.
The instructor, you mean?
Yeah, the instructor.
Yeah, they have in there to where they're not really meant to provide consulting. Some of the instructors that I've seen are kind of fearful that they could get in trouble for providing consulting during the training process. And I just feel that there's so much great wisdom to a lot of these auditors and other assessors and people that have been in the field for years swinging for the fence, and now they've been doing teaching, and they want to talk really real world about things that they've seen, but they're kind of hamstrung to some extent out of fear of providing perhaps consulting, right? Because they can't talk about scenarios and answer questions, things like that, and some stuff. Now, I know I've seen some, even in our Edwards course, I've seen some of the trainers that were more forthcoming around that, others that were a little bit more reserved, I think, to each his own in that area. But if they just clearly just allowed them to do that, I just don't see the wisdom in why they just live in fear, like why the Cyber AB and the DoD doesn't allow that. Like
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the second one. Allow OSCs or seeking certification to pass with an 88, but will need to be reassessed in a year. Well, first, 88 is such an odd number. Can you explain why you said it that way and what you mean by that?
Yeah, because that's how fast you have to go to Back to the Future is
Right.
88.
Yep.
The flux capacitor. Well, the 88 is the score number that you're allowed to put a POAM if you hit the trifecta of controls that you're allowed to fail or get not mets on. And that's freaking hard. Like, I think you would almost have to try to fail in order to be able to do that 88 and still
agree. I think it is like you're
It's
trying to get a badge on a video game to
Right.
get the 88.
Achievement unlocked.
Yeah.
I still got my certification and I did an 88. Like, yeah, it's just because of the way the point systems, the DODAM, it's basically kind of their scoring methodology that they use and how they do their assessment methodology of whether you, and that's where they kind of came up with that 88. And you're really, it's only a certain amount of 1-pointers of the 110 controls you're allowed to fail. And so, I mean, there's 110 of them, 320 assessment objectives. To assume that you would hit the jackpot of failing only some of those that fall in that 88. I have never talked to anyone that has ever got a POAMable situation. I've heard and talked with other people that plenty have just failed some of the controls that weren't POAMable, therefore they failed their assessment.
Yeah.
And I think, you know,
POAMable. Are you making that like a phrase now?
Yeah, that's a thing. POAMable. Yeah. And so POAMable is really my definition of plan of action and milestones. In other words, items that are allowed for you in 180 days to correct. And then your C3PO will reevaluate how you've done. And if you feel like you've met them, then therefore you'll go from conditional to fully pass. But I feel like they should narrow that down to like certain specific 5-pointers, even some 3-pointers. There's some things that they have that are 3-pointers that I think are silly, or 1-pointers that should probably be 5-pointers. But well, that's a whole other video. But my point is there's certain, like if you don't have your SSP, that's one control. Like if you don't have an SSP, like it's just a fail.
Yeah.
But there's certain things that you really should have. So, but I would just say like be a little more graceful and lower that down to less of the controls so that you could still POAM things a lot easier and get it in that 180 days. I feel like, because it is not realistic the way that they have it on which 1-pointers you would fit. It's just such a small spackling. So I just think they need to add some more grace in there to allow organizations to hit the 180 days. Because I think their fear is, if we give too much grace, they're going to try to stand up whole systems. You know, I mean, if you don't have change management and you don't have, you know, I don't know, something in IA like identity management appropriately set up, or you don't have those procedures, like it would be really difficult to hit that in 180 days.
Yeah.
So I think the time frame that they have creates that reasonableness about it. And the C3PO, obviously, just let them have the control. Because the reality is there's just so much that a lot of these companies have never started working on. Give them some grace to try to get into the system. And then, you know, if they don't pass, then they can go at it again. But just try to don't make perfect the enemy of okay or good in this situation. I think they just, it was almost a knee-jerk reaction. They were just so frustrated with how things were. I think they just went with a too stringent scoring system.
And so with that perspective, you're kind of saying allow for a little bit more flexibility with that lowest score of 88, but also they will need to be reassessed in a year still because of that. So
yeah, I would include 3-pointers and some 5-pointers and maybe not some 1-pointers. I would look at overarching all of those controls and have a subset that are not, they cannot POAM those. But the rest, if you were able to get the 88 score, then you could still move on to try to finish out as a 110 in 180 days. Just give them that 180 day. Just give them more time to do that. In the 108 days, they can either do it or they can't.
Yeah.
If you can't, then see you in another audit.
Okay. I like it.
I feel like it. And because, we've been doing this now for a while, and like just the requirement of those scores are just so high, and there's so little grace there. It just forces so much more extra validation of things because there's just not enough grace for you to correct things naturally, that you have to be at such a high level of perfection when you're going through your audit. It increases the cost. Like if you could have more grace there, the C3POs, their job is to go through and really catch those things. And they're doing, I think, in my opinion, most of them are doing a great job of that. So they're going to catch those things and keep that level up. And you can just, give you a little bit extra grace in that 180 days to get it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What about number 3? Here we go. Have a C3PAO assessment process for MSPs specifically that would be inheritable.
That's a pie in the sky one.
That sounds super easy to do. I can't believe they haven't done it yet.
Well, but if they did have it, let's just kind of go through what the world would look like. I think you'd see a lot more MSPs that would be very serious about wanting to step in this space, because then if they were able to get their processes evaluated through some type of assessment methodology, because remember, we have, in our opinion, there's really 2 types of services MSPs provide: infrastructure provided and services provided, right? So if the MSP is providing an infrastructure, that's probably something that they hosted themselves or some service they're providing that was part of their audit, right? That has already been assessed, and the client is using that infrastructure that they've had. So because that infrastructure got audited, that should pretty much be already passable and inheritable natively with the way 32 CFR is written. But not a lot of MSPs are holding that infrastructure and having that in their audit. So the chance of that happening requires forethought by the MSP. It has some additional constraints and things and challenges around that whole area, but it's doable, right? But services provided are just things that the MSP is doing for the client. But if there was a methodology that the DoD could assess MSPs and their methodologies about how they're providing that to their client, then if they adhere to those and that's what they apply to the client, those could also be inheritable through what was assessed and their level 2. And what that would mean is the threshold for the client, the areas that they would be responsible for, shrinks considerably, and the chance of them passing increases significantly because those areas are examined but not thoroughly reviewed because they've already been reviewed. So that you're leaning on the assessment piece of the MSP, and that they're following those assessments, processes they outlined.
Yeah.
And then the client's really responsible for things like, personnel security, the HR type processes, their physical access and door control things. Like you can't really inherit that if they have a physical location. So those are things where, you could really reduce the audit to like 1 day.
Yeah.
And that's where they could go, wow, we really need an MSP because this solves so much of our solutions, providers that do that. And so what it starts to do is unlock a lot of these organizations' ability to reach out to these providers and get implementation costs much cheaper. It would lower significantly the cost and requirements for them to, because those providers come in and they're going to be able to do that for them and do it at a high level because that's what's been assessed.
Yeah. I love this idea, but I think there's even another layer to it, because even if you did create the assessment itself, I think you would have to have different assessors for it, because they would have to be, in my opinion, technical, and not all of them are technically savvy.
Yeah, it would be different than a level 2. They would have to understand the ecosystem. It would have to be an assessment that is appropriate for MSPs. It would probably be outside of 800-171. There would be a lot more maturity requirements around that, so they would be looking at more than that.
I agree.
But I would be open to having a separate audit around things like that if I knew that they could validate where we're at, and then we had inheritance. Sign me up for that.
Yeah, but I'm even saying like the C3PO, like I think there would have to be a different type of assessor that comes in and assesses
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
yeah. I think so. I would
But they
hate.
have to understand
Right.
the services that you are providing, and
Yes.
not the regular Joe Schmo, that's taken a CCA course is also going to know the MSP technical aspect of it to be able to assess that properly. And I think that is critical because you don't want MSPs coming in here and fluffing that assessment.
No. Yeah.
They need to, be
Right.
hardcore. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
that's like you're so right because that would require a whole new learning path, a whole
Hmm.
new requirement of validation. I mean, it would be much more. It's pretty serious.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's doable. But
Hmm.
I mean, it's a bit of a pie in the sky right now just because the cyber AB is just struggling to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah, but that would be
Like
so cool.
I have tickets I've put in they haven't even replied to yet for just me personally, let alone
Yeah.
audits and things that are
Don't
happening.
worry if you want to be a client of ours. We always respond to our tickets very quickly. He's not
Yes.
talking about ours.
Right. I'm talking about the cyber AB.
Yeah, write that
Like
down.
I can't tell you how many tickets I've had out there that have zero replies from them.
Yeah, they need to go
There's
through
only
this.
like I think 6 or 7
The
or 8
cyber
of them.
AB needs to go through this MSP assessment for the ticketing process. There you
Yes.
go. Okay, so number 4, I'm curious very much so about a certain part of this one. I think this is where you added in a little bit.
Okay.
So number 4, have yearly reviews be done by a C through PAO, and
Hmm.
changes can be addressed then
Yes.
instead of full assessment. So explain what you mean by that.
Yeah. So instead of go through this audit, see you in 3 years, unless you make a change. I mean, like I
Same
personally
thing.
work with lots and lots of clients, and they never change. They always
It's
stay the
exactly
same,
the
right?
same.
So
You go
that's
back to our email
very
that we
realistic.
just received a few days ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unrealistic,
Yeah.
right? To think that there won't be significant changes. And so many, I talked to so many C3POs, other MSPs, and they're like, what the heck is a change at a level significant enough that's going to require a new audit? And that's where I just think it's sort of bogus. What needs to be is it needs to be every year part of the self-attestation the client needs to do is it shouldn't be self-attested. It needs to be part of the relationship between them and the C3PO they have. They go through and look at a subset of controls. If they've gone through some changes, those would be targeted, and that would be part of their evaluation they load at the year. That requires more of a connectivity with the C3PO. Yes, there's going to be costs in that, but if you have that system already established, you could keep the cost down. Plus, it would probably reduce your initial 3-year assessment because they know they're going to have a relationship with that organization indefinitely, right? Almost like ISO for that perspective. So that's where I feel like they just missed the bar there. That if they have that relationship, it would address the change processes throughout the year. It would allow that relationship. The self-assessments at the end of the year would then be done by the C3PO. They
Yeah.
would help with the uploading of the process, and they keep the relationship with the C3PO. I think it would help keep all of those organizations that have gotten their level 2 more corralled appropriately and keeping them safe and secure over the course of those 3 years.
I love that you talk about a relationship with a C3PAO because I think that goes back to our previous topic about like through C3PAOs being scared to give recommendations and whatnot. And I feel like it goes the opposite way where OSCs are scared to like have somewhat of a relationship with a C3PAO because they think it like it's supposed to be like a cut and dry, very much of a thing. But it's like why would you go to a new C3PAO every 3 years? You're not. You're going to go to, if you liked them, like, you're going to go to the same one that knows you and knows your company. So, of course, you can like foster still a relationship with that C3PAO. And yeah, that totally makes sense to me. I get what you're
And then also you can be like, okay, look, we're changing locations. We bought another company. We're adding this whole new system. You can reach out to the C3PO and
What
say,
does this
hey,
look like for you
is,
guys?
is this what kind of impact is this going to have on our compliance from that perspective? Not from
Yes.
a consulting perspective, but more from a, what are these types of controls? What are these things? Is this going to trigger an activity? Do we need to review some things? They could look at some components pieces. So, they could even look at it even throughout the year to try to help make sure they're staying in alignment versus they're just winging it and then see you in 3 years.
Yeah.
And then it's up to them if they want to be transparent, if they made a change significant, that would be an audit. I feel like it's fraught with peril. Just allowing that connectivity with the C3PO more. I feel like in general, like the DoD sort of kind of took the attitude of let's create these audit processes like how DIBCAC is. Get in there, do the audit real quick, and get the crap out, and have no relationship, because that's how DIBCAC did their audits.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big miss. I think there needs to be a relationship between the C3POs to help keep those clients more in alignment with where they need to be.
Yeah.
And I think that would drop the cost. It would reduce the risks. Is there a chance of collusion? Sure. Yeah. I mean, but
There's
I think
already a chance now.
right.
I already have seen some sketchy stuff, and I'm like, I don't think you should be able to do that. Like, for example, like if somebody is coming up to me and they're saying, "Oh, I know that this C3PAO will not request evidence for these controls." What are you talking about? Send them to the DOJ. Like, that is ridiculous. I think that's insane. Like, there is literally a person that came up to me and just thought that that was a casual conversation. And I'm like, writing that down. And if you're listening to this and you're the C3PO, I wrote down your name. But I just can't believe that some of those things are happening already, So, I mean, if you're talking
And the
about those kind of
rules
stuff,
and the
it's
rules
already
are
happening.
there to enforce it. It's just I think the cyber AB is just so far
Yeah,
up
they
their
don't have
eyeballs.
time to even
They don't
enforce
have
them in that
time,
way.
which is sad because the ecosystem really needs a steady hand at the wheel, and I just feel like they're just playing catch up. I think the cyber AB really needed money.
Yeah.
Doing the no cost dollar type thing was a bad idea. I think
Yeah.
they needed revenue for them to be able to operate and keep a well-oiled machine going here. And because they had to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps financially, it's just been very challenging for them.
Yeah, I want to start seeing in the cyber AB like town halls. I want to see somebody on staff that like they call like Thor, and he puts the hammer down, and he calls out people in that town hall. Oh man, I would attend all of them,
Yeah,
like
nothing like a
live.
public hanging to solve
Yes,
some
and
problems.
maybe even Jacob Horn makes a special edition for himself, and I wouldn't mind that, like Jacob, go for it.
Maybe you could add like an image of Jacob Horn, like a Thor
As
holding the
Thor.
hammer.
Okay, go
Oh
ahead
my
and
Lord,
write that.
that would
Yeah,
be
go ahead.
awesome. Put it somewhere right here would
Put
be
it somewhere here.
great.
And if you're not watching this, that's on you. That you didn't get to see that image. So go back and watch it on YouTube. Yeah, I completely agree. And I hope that we start to see the hammer get put down, because there are some amazing C3POs that are doing an excellent
Yes.
job that I've seen doing some really great things for the ecosystem. And then
And for
there's
the
some,
country. They're doing some great stuff for the
yeah,
country,
yeah,
I feel. I mean,
I
that's the way I
agree.
look at it.
I agree. Yep. Okay, let's talk about number 5, the last one. Okay, drop FIPS and provide good clarity on CSPs that contain SPD. Now, that's a lot of acronyms there in that sentence. So break down what you're talking about there.
Yeah, as an MSP, like FIPS is the bane of our existence. Like it is just it FIPS is not a type of encryption. It's a validated encryption. A lot of people get that wrong because they think, oh, so it's a type of encryption. No, it's not a type. Like any type of encryption could technically get FIPS validated. It's just what they're trying to do is the encryption methodology just validate it's not sending information where it's not supposed to go. That it's sound, that the type of encryption and how it's being done is safe. And I get that. It makes sense. Like I would like a guard at the front door of my house, but is that realistic for people coming and going in my house? No, it is not. I'm not, POTUS, the president of the United States.
Yeah.
So I don't have security like that. But the problem is it has to go through NIST's system of validation, and it's so cumbersome and difficult for organizations to go through the FIPS process to get their encryption modules authorized and accredited. It is just so hard for them to do. And so what that does is it forces older encryption to have precedence, because no one wants to go through that hell. So they're just robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep those how they are, versus using more newer standards of encryptions, but because they haven't gone through the FIPS validation process, we can't use them. And also tools and other things get left on the wayside. So we're just, I understand the concept, but it just needs to die like the dog that it is. I get it, but the risk and reward just isn't there. Let it go, princess. Just move on. and allow encryption to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and just allow organizations to do the encryption how they are. This is controlled unclassified information. This isn't secret information. This is controlled unclassified information. So I feel like it would allow organizations to have better security by using more relevant and accurate mechanisms in today, and more tool sets would now be more valid, because there's certain things that you can't use because it just, like even remote capabilities and other things, just they're not, because they don't have FIPS validated modules, you can't use them. So just so many tools get invalidated because of that requirement. So just removing that would cover over a multitude of sins, and that's just my opinion.
And so for people that don't understand when FIPS comes into the light and surfaces, this has to do with security protection data inside of cloud
Well,
service providers, or can you explain
CUI.
that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Well, it's just around CUI. Like, so if CUI, interestingly, in Rev 3, they don't care. In Rev 2 right now, you have physical protections. So you don't have to have the communication necessarily FIPS encrypted inside the network. But if I remember correctly, in version 3 or Rev 3 of 800.171 alpha, that's gone. You don't have physical boundaries to protect it. So even internally inside your environment, the communication will start to become required to be FIPS validated. So that means, you're going to have to use Meraki or other types of much more expensive networking equipment, or using some type of ZTNA solutions to enforce the encryption to happen. It's requiring a much higher level of technological requirements around that. And so for these SMBs, I mean, you're just raising the bar higher and higher for them because of that FIPS validation.
I think about this, and I go, how in the world are these small companies doing this without an IT provider, or like somebody doing?
No chance.
How do they implement this stuff? It is just, it's really eye-opening to me, and I think it's cool that you shared your perspective on things that you would change too, because I would love to hear other people's perspectives on. We can read the rules all day. We can read the documentation that the DoD, that the CyberAB, that all of them give us, but it's the boots on the ground getting it implemented that really shows what it's like to, like, what the words actually mean. And I hope that they take that into account and take these types of people into account, because they're the ones that are really doing it and are seeing what is difficult, what works, what doesn't work, and
It'd be great.
it would be great if they, yeah.
Well,
But what
now
they do is they ask for the comments, though. They ask for the comments when they're making the rule. And I think that they should ask for comments too 1 year after the rule is out and you're implemented it. And you could be like, okay, now I actually take back what I said in the comment before.
Well, and that 5 also has kind of like a two-parter, like we talked about security protection data.
Yeah.
So security protection data is really this kind of stepchild of CUI that is CUI adjacent. In other words, it's data that has been collected through, I believe the way that DoD is sort of looking at it, data that's is around these security protection assets, like your SIM tool or your your identity and access management system. Like maybe you have Intra, maybe you have Active Directory. Like those systems are generating data that you would want to use to reference if you had an incident, or look at things to validate that people that are supposed to be in your environment are doing what they should do. That's security protection data. That data is aggregating, it's building, it needs to go somewhere. Someone's got to monitor it.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just insider threat, but you need to have the ability to do that. And that type of data, they want to know it's being protected. And so they want to have requirements around it being assessed during your assessment process. So they just need better guidance on that security protection data. Like, what does that mean? How do we protect it? Just better guidelines on what's going to be required during that assessment. Because right now, if you talk to a CCA, their opinion on what security protection data is and what's required during the assessment varies kind of wildly. And so just providing better insight in the 32 CFR, I think that would have been done. Because people didn't really hear about security protection data until the 32 CFR rule came out. Nobody had heard of it. You can scour 171 alpha, it's nowhere in there. Even in the Rev 3, it's not in there. The security protection data is just something that materialized during the 32 CFR proposed rule, and people were losing their mind because they'd never heard of it. It's not NARA. It's not a category around COI. It's just this thing that they sort of created. It makes sense. I understand it, but there's just not enough guidance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been really fun. I hope that we can do this, even do another one maybe 6 months from now or something, to get your perspective on it even then,
Yeah.
at the end of the year.
Well, I'd like y'alls and Adams.
Yeah.
What were your 5 things?
Maybe we could do ours too. And I'd love to hear just people's thoughts and perspectives from their implementation of things and doing it in the system. Make sure to comment on this video, or on our Spotify if you're listening there, or whatnot. We want to hear your feedback too, and just your perspectives and what you're seeing out there in the ecosystem. And maybe in a few months we can do one from Adam and do one from me too. So that'd be pretty cool.
I'm curious to see what y'all say.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for next Thursday for another episode. But until then, guys, keep on climbing. See ya. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.